There's a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Australia's best independent news and opinion radio show, The Daily Australian, with Nicola Charles and Jason Olbourne.
And we're back. Welcome to episode 117 of the Daily Australian for Monday, June the 23rd. Look at that. Half the year almost gone. Nicola Charles, welcome back to the show. How much can happen at a weekend? Wow.
It's a bit unsettling, isn't it, how much has happened? If you want me on today's show, you get me leadless as I'm having sound problems. So that will be fixed by tomorrow. So apologies for the sound, but yeah, it's a worrying time for us all, isn't it? You know, and it's just, you know, the latest thing in a long line of concerning events over a 5-year period.
Well, yeah. So most of us here in Australia woke up Sunday morning to find the news of US intervention in the ongoing nuclear situation in Iran. It's such an odd scenario that it just seems that there is just layer upon information and fact. Does Iran have a nuclear weapons program? Is nuclear enrichment enrichment of uranium leading to a nuclear bomb? When you have the Atomic Agency saying that there's no other purpose for it to enrich it to such levels, and then yet the denials. And so to take such a swift action to get in and get out, and we'll show you some clips in a little while of the response from the Trump administration, from J.D. Vance, from Marco Rubio, from Pete Hegseth, and even from Tom Holman, to sort of put a perspective there about what's going on. I know that that X over the weekend has just blown up with, oh, goodness me, whether they're the contrarians or whether they're the peacemongers, the peaceniks, or the anti-Trumpers. It just seems that everyone wants to have their 2 cents, and that's what it's all about. This is why we're here, to be able to create a voice and have a voice. But the one thing that hits me in the face each time is the underestimation continuously of the 45th and 47th president of the United States. The idea that the Democrats come out and said that he had no congressional authority. Well, Obama struck without congressional authority. Biden also struck on numerous occasions. Why is it that we have a double standard when it comes to such a scenario? And we can probably talk about that as well. But it's an imbalance. To go a little bit further, and I think that this is probably a good place to start the discussion. Many people were criticising Albanese for being silent for 24 hours since what's going on. Well, The Guardian has now reported, headline news from Australia's response, and it's got a photograph of Penny Wong, but I'm going to put it up on screen for you. The Guardian writes, Australian government backs US strikes on Iran, but urges peaceful settlement from here, whilst refusing to say whether Pine Gap communications in the Northern Territory was used in the US bombing of the 3 Iranian nuclear sites. But embedded within the article is this quote from Penny Wong. The world has long understood we cannot allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. That is a very distinct line in the sand from the Communist Party of Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese, if you will. That is as far left as you can get, and they are in total agreement with what the US has said. They said, we are going in, we're striking only these nuclear facilities. We're not striking civilians, and we're not even striking any other military facilities. So it is very, very strict. So if that means that Australia is 100% in line with what the Trump administration has said, and we'll play some clips there, I just find that fascinating that there is that alignment after everything that we've seen over the weekend. My point being, if you are on the left, if you're on the right, if you're on the extremes or in the centre, if the political parties are agreeing from that distance apart, then everything else seems to be screaming at the clouds. How many protests have we seen over the last 5 years that results in zero change? That's been my point. So we follow along here and report the best that we can, Nicola.
My concern is that I don't believe we are ever told the truth. I'm afraid since 2020, I don't believe any of them on anything they're saying, and I'll give you examples of why in a moment. I find it odd that Keir Starmer and Piers Morgan are in full support of Trump because, for the longest time, they were sort of, Piers Morgan was backing medical tyranny, absolutely, and he's had his feet held to the fire for that, but he didn't lose his career like the rest of us. Keir Starmer has attacked freedom of speech, and Trump said he doesn't want to work with allies who threaten freedom of speech. A lot of people on the left, like AOC in the USA, they're saying it's appalling and Trump wasn't allowed to do it, and yet these were the people that were holding up Ukrainian flags in the Congress, and they were very pro-war 2 seconds ago, and they still want to keep sending lots of money to Zelensky. But let me just say why I'm suspicious of it. Call it another Daily Australian game show. I just want you to answer. I don't want any comment. I just want yes or no answers to the next couple of questions, Jason. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Is it likely that America lied to the world about the assassination of JFK?
Yep.
Is it likely that America lied to the world about the circumstances of the moon landing?
Likely, yes.
Is it likely that America lied to the world about the circumstances of 9/11?
Yes.
Is it likely that America lied to the world about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq?
Certainly.
Is it likely that America lied to the world about the origins of COVID?
Yep.
Is it likely that America lied to the world about the COVID-19 mRNA injections being safe and effective?
Well, certainly.
Right. And is it likely that America has lied to the world about the Epstein debacle?
We don't even know what they've said about the Epstein debacle, but yes.
The suicide, right. So all of those things we've been misled on by the United States of America. So I sit here looking at Iran. Iran is 79 times larger than Israel. Did you know that? So it is an obvious threat. But there are other countries in the world that have nukes. The UK has nukes. France have nukes. Pakistan have nukes. I wouldn't exactly call them a stable society. Obviously, China, India, Russia. But North Korea has nukes. So I'm concerned about who gets the nukes and who doesn't. Who gets the little green nuke tick? It's all very strange, Jason. We've been misled on so much in not just recent history, but really the history of our lifetime. That do I believe that the United States and Israel are going into Iran to remove their ability to enrich uranium? No, I don't.
Well, I'll give you this one. This popped up today. I'm old enough to remember this every night on TV for 444 days. And this is the Iran hostage crisis of 1979, which was the end of Jimmy Carter's presidency, and Ronald Reagan acting assuredly was the reason there. What is also interesting, and I'm going to play a clip now from, this is a fellow called Ali Safavi from the Iranian resistance. This is reporting on the previous parliamentary elections from a couple of years ago. But I think it's very important to provide perspective as we try and understand Iran as much as we try and report on the West. I think this is quite interesting. It's just under 2 minutes. Take a look.
In every respect, the sham parliamentary election held in Iran last week was a crushing defeat for the entirety of the regime and the supreme leader, who wanted to showcase this as a sign of overwhelming support for his moribund regime. After two days of delay and confusion, the Interior Minister announced with great fanfare that some 42.57% had participated in the election. This is an absolute lie. Given that in Tehran alone, which is the largest or most populated province in the country, only 19% of the eligible voters had cast their ballots, and the top vote getter, IRGC Brigadier General Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, had garnered roughly 1.2 million votes, which is 14% of the eligible voters, for the total turnout to be 42%, you would need 70 to 75 turnout throughout the country, which is absolutely not the case. In fact, the extent of boycott outside Tehran was much greater than it was in Tehran. The call for the election boycott by the NCRI's president-elect Maryam Rajavi and the MEK's resistance units campaign throughout Iran, which basically propagated a boycott and called for a boycott, made it palpably clear that the Iranian people, the overwhelming majority of the Iranian people, want the overthrow of this regime and want it replaced with a democratic, secular government which is representative of the 83 million Iranians. It is high time for the Europeans to abandon their policy of appeasement. They no longer have any excuse, and they should stand with the Iranian people and recognize their right to overthrow this medieval regime.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? Because we get a one-sided look at what's going on, and we don't get. And we've talked about the idea of Iranians calling themselves Persian, those that live expats, etc., and a very different understanding. Another thing that caught my interest over the weekend, and I thought I just don't know enough about it, so I started researching Islam. And call me ignorant, whatever, but I didn't understand the difference really between the beliefs between a Sunni and a Shiite or a Shia, and understanding who was connected to who. So Iran, Iraq, and Bahrain are the countries that have a majority of Shia Muslims. But Shia only represents as little as 13% of all Muslims. The rest of them are Sunnis. And the difference was the belief whether you thought that that the Prophet Muhammad's descendants would therefore lead as imams, lead the religion as a cleric. So the Sunnis believe that there is no descendant, and therefore it would be somebody who would be elected, whereas the Shia believe that it is a descendant, and therefore a descendant of Muhammad would lead as an imam cleric of the religion.
No,
So
the last actual descendant was a small boy age 5, and they killed him age 5. And apparently it then went over to an in-law, and that's how it's carried on.
And so you have a belief that some should vote, some say you should vote first, and it's indirect, and some say not. And both believe in a Mahdi or a Messiah. And it's not dissimilar in the split that some believe it would be a descendant and it's somebody who's already been born and somebody who will return. And this is very similar to the beliefs in the Jewish religion and the Christian religion. So if Christians believe that the Messiah has arrived in Jesus Christ and his second coming, whereas Jews believe that the Messiah has not yet come, and upon his arrival will be the building of the third temple. And this is what is so fascinating. So Jews and Christians are unaligned, despite the fact that Jesus was a Jewish rabbi, a teacher. And yet within the Islamic religion, there is conflict within the religion itself over who will be their Messiah to bring peace on earth, etc. So there's so many cross-contaminated ideas here. Now, one thing's for sure is the Shias and the Sunnis both can't be right, but certainly they can both be wrong. And yet blood is thrown, is spilt, people die, wars are held. And within the whole community, we only played a clip last week of Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia saying that in Iran, he likened him to a Nazi. But then you've got, again, Sunnis versus Shias. It's such a complicated scenario. And you're just trying to work out peace, some sort of peaceful resolution. But I find it so interesting that Ali Safavi there is talking about a non-religious government, a secular government returning like they had with the Shah of Iran, who was literally thrown out back in the late 70s. So I think that's an extraordinary scenario, and it is nothing. There's certainly not unity, as we've seen in Iran, far from it. And there's not even unity, of course, in the Middle East amongst Islamic nations. So it is complicated, it is confusing, and therefore one wonders if this is going to lead to the Iranian people calling for regime change. And that is something that has been addressed today by both J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. And we'll get to those clips in a moment.
I think they probably will call for that. Well, I talk about my Iranian friends who are now in Australia, but obviously lots of their family are still there. They're Christians, so I guess they're out of that debate. I think it's what's an element that's concerning to me as to why, not being told the truth and not trusting what's happened here is that not just from Iran, but there are sleeper cells from every single one of America's enemies now inside the interior of the United States of America. No doubt, I'm telling you now, inside the interior of Australia, because we've had open borders, mass migration. There's no way with the numbers involved that people have had their, police checks. I doubt they've even had a medical check, to be honest. And it's very concerning. And I also get frustrated with America and her conflicts, let's say her involvement, that America likes to be a little bit pregnant, but it doesn't want a baby at the end of it, right? So America likes to be a little bit pregnant in the Ukraine-Russian war. It doesn't want to put boots on the ground. It doesn't want to actively get involved. It doesn't want to declare war on Russia. And yet it has funded to the tune of billions, probably trillions of US dollars to fund the Ukraine war. And here we are again. We let Israel strike first, and now America's getting involved somewhat, as in a little bit pregnant. Why doesn't, obviously I just mentioned all the things that we've been deceived about. Why can we not just have honesty from these governments? And I understand it's an intelligence thing, but I just don't trust any of their motives, because you're either in or you're out. You can't be a little bit pregnant and you can't be a little bit involved in a war. So it's very, very confusing. Like you, I'm upset over the weekend seeing people get very excited about war and conflict and bombs. And I don't like the way that plays on part of us as human beings. But I just think, any person of any level of intellect would sit back and just assume that none of this is what we're being told it is, because they wouldn't tell us what it's really about. And I'm worried about what it is really about, because Keir Starmer's supporting this and he wants Brits to support this. And of course, he's just allowed a massive influx of Muslims into the UK, and that's already created problems over the last number of years. Could that be in some part a way to frustrate and frighten the British public to the point where they will call for the nation to go to war with a Muslim country, or predominantly or even partly Muslim country? So I just think this stuff is so layered and so dark and so deceptive that I don't trust a thing that comes out of any of their mouths.
Well, we certainly saw a difference in the outlying president. So he's not part of said establishment, though people will go back and say that he is because, warmongering, etc. But there is a distinct line in the sand. Let's start with some of these clips now by showing you, if we go talking about sleeper cells, this is Tom Holman speaking directly on the subject on Fox News earlier.
Can you assess that issue particularly? How many Iranians are in the country that are in sleeper cells trying to do bad to America right now?
Well, look, you and I have talked about this many times. I said the last 4 years, my biggest concern was this open border was the biggest national security vulnerability this country's ever seen. So I pulled numbers this morning just from a CBP under Joe Biden. There was 1,272 nationals of Iran released in the country between OFO and the Border Patrol. And you compare that to the Trump administration, zero. Right, zero releases. And right now, because of President Trump's leadership, we have the most secure border in my lifetime, most secure border in the history of this nation. So we have a secure border. That was President Trump's big win on securing this nation. So we're not releasing people in this country. Special interest aliens aren't crossing that border undetected. But under Joe Biden, we had over 10 million people cross that border. But my biggest concern from day one, beyond the fentanyl, beyond the sex trafficking women and children, were the 2 million known gotaways. Over 2 million people crossed that border. We don't know who they are, where they came from because they got away, because Border Patrol was so overwhelmed with the humanitarian crisis that Biden created that over 2 million people crossed the border and got away. That is my biggest concern, and that's what created the biggest national security vulnerability this country's ever seen.
And you have that on surveillance, seeing people get away. Do you have a sense of where they went?
No, the intelligence community under President Trump has been on this since day one. What gives me any comfort at all is that you don't have Christopher Wray there, you got Kash Patel there. You don't have Alejandro Mayorkas there anymore, you got Kristi Noem, and you certainly don't have Kamala Harris as a border czar. So President Trump brought a great team, been on this since day one. Do we know where every one of the 2 million are? No. We don't know who they all are. We don't know why they're here, where they came from. But we do know Border Patrol intelligence for the last 4 years, they found prayer mats south of the border. They found identification from people from Iran, Turkey, Uzbekistan, Syria, south of the border. So we know that some terrorists have crossed that border. We'd be a fool to think zero cross. The thing is, though, we got President Trump as a commander-in-chief who's put all resources on that. That's why President Trump from day one, ICE operations, despite what the left media says, he has been focused on national security threats and public safety threats. And between ICE and the Bureau, we've removed thousands of national security threats because of President Trump's leadership on this.
Yes, that's right. Tom, thank you very much.
So addressing certainly sleeper cells in the US, but the preparations certainly being made there. So it's almost as if you could argue that they were planning that this would be one of the scenarios that would play out. And of course, there has been a lot more detail. I think in relation to that, we'll get to another clip shortly in terms of the negotiation component. And we'll hear from Marco Rubio shortly on that one. But I don't know if that gives reassurance, but it certainly shows you that there is awareness. And if you were looking for anyone in this space, Tom Holman seems to be the most capable, at least, of dealing with this. And when we know now that we're not being lied to from the perspective that there is positive action taking place, at least to protect against said sleeper cells.
Well, J.D. Vance and Trump are saying this is not about regime change. But now we're in a situation that if we don't get regime change, they've just closed that Strait of Hormuz, which is a busy oil trade for, ships, planes. We've got a clip of that. Then what Trump's effectively done is something the globalists have wanted for a long time, which is the choking of the oil supply, fossil fuels. 20% of the world's oil supply, most of it goes to China from that region, comes through that strait. And, right now, that regime has ordered its closure. So unless now we have regime change, which they're saying we don't want, that's the end of that. I don't know if you want to play that clip to see how busy the traffic is there, Jason.
Yeah, it's kind of extraordinary, isn't it? But let's play it for you now. You'll just get a sort of a glimpse of the activity of this, the busiest region that you'll see for the shipping of our energy.
So the globalists, that's like a wet dream for the globalists, right? Oh, we've got less oil, we've got less fossil fuels. That will affect inflation, fuel pricing, the availability of fuel. And they know that they know that this would be the outcome. So it's going to be interesting. You say you don't want regime change. I guess they're trying to encourage the population of Iran to do that. But it is a huge country. Many of the populations are in the mountains, and they wouldn't even be getting sort of 24 hours a day news. So I'm interested to see what might happen.
Well, let's play a clip now. This is Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, talking about the Strait of Hormuz.
To close the Strait of Hormuz to try to disrupt oil transportation across the world?
Well, I encourage the Chinese government in Beijing to call them about that, because they heavily depend on the Straits of Hormuz for their oil. If they do that, it'll be another terrible mistake. It's economic suicide for them if they do it. And we retain options to deal with that. But other countries should be looking at that as well. It would hurt other countries' economies a lot worse than ours. It would be, I think, a massive escalation that would merit a response, not just by us, but from others. So, look, they're going to say what they need to say. You know, these are the things that need to happen for their own internal politics and so forth. But in the end, we're going to judge them by the actions that they take moving forward. We had 3 objectives. We struck those 3 objectives with decisive force. And that was the point of this mission. And that's what we achieved. What happens next will depend on what they do. They want to negotiate. We're ready to negotiate. They want to get cute and do things that are dangerous. We have responses available that are devastating.
They want to get cute. They struck them. I think you guys got cute, to be honest.
Well, this is the point. Let's go and now see and talk about Rubio now on said warnings.
The goal is stated very clearly in a letter the president sent the Supreme Leader about 65, 67 days ago. And in a letter he said, you're not going to have a nuclear weapon. Let's negotiate peacefully a solution. We can make a really good deal that's good for Iran, good for America, good for the world. If you don't, however, then I'm going to have to deal with this differently. The Iranians didn't like the letter. They didn't respond to it. They ultimately entered into fake negotiations and tried to play them along. In essence, they thought they could do with President Trump what they've done with presidents in the past and get away with it. And they found out last night that they can't. And the world found out last night that you can't. And that's important, not just on this issue, but for so many other issues happening around the world. I think that what we are seeing is that this is a president that tells you what he's going to do, and then he does it. And I think that to a lot of people, including the Iranian regime, is shocking.
So you either negotiate or you don't negotiate. But if the whole world is saying that you can't have a nuclear weapon and you don't want to negotiate, well, this is where we are right now. I find it interesting that finally someone's calling them out on their bluff, and we deal with the consequences. I'll go back a little bit further now and just give you some comments from Pete Hegseth on the actual events that took place Sunday afternoon.
Tehran is certainly calculating the reality that planes flew from the middle of America and Missouri overnight, completely undetected, over 3 of their most highly sensitive sites, and we were able to destroy nuclear capabilities. And our boys in those bombers are on their way home right now. We believe that'll have a clear psychological impact on how they view the future, and we certainly hope they take the path of negotiated peace. But I could not be more proud.
It's America. A bit scary. I said on Friday, didn't I, that America is a big old gangster, right? So if you're considered a friendly nation, which I believe Australia is, and the UK, and NATO, right, Five Eyes, then what you get is the lever of tariffs. And consider yourself lucky. Even China got those, right? Even friendly to China. So we're going to do all these tariffs unless you play commercial ball with us, because this is all about commerce. And then if you're not a friendly nation, you get made offers, and if you don't accept them, you get bombed. That's what we're looking at. So this is a different Trump, isn't it, to the first administration?
I don't think so. I think it's still strength. What is it? Peace through strength. It's the same thing. North Korea was certainly handled by Trump going over there. North Korea became a puppy. We saw the Russian Defense Minister Shoigu head over there the other day, last week, make that meeting that we didn't hear much about, but that would be more than anything keeping Kim in line so that he's not threatening. There used to be those almost weekly nuclear tests that we would hear from Kim Jong-un in North Korea, and now we don't hear anything from him. He keeps very, very quiet. So I find it quite interesting, but I'm reminded that we saw the video from Ali Safavi talking about regime change within a secular government. We've seen the very low turning out there. There will, of course, be the fanatics that will argue that, no, this is Iran and they're entitled to do what they're doing. There has been an emergency meeting at the United Nations that's taken place, and I can provide you with a little bit of the notes there of what's come out. just now. So to get to its conclusion, they said there's now been new questions about Iran's nuclear stockpile. Whilst Iran has long maintained that its nuclear program was peaceful and US intelligence agencies assessed that Tehran is not actively pursuing a bomb, that's not accurate. However, Trump and Israeli leaders have argued that Iran could quickly assemble a nuclear weapon. Israel has significantly degraded Iran's air defenses and offensive missile capabilities and damaged its nuclear enrichment facilities. But only the US military has the bunker buster bombs that officials believed have offered the best chance of destroying sites deep underground, and a total of 14 of the bombs were used on those 3 sites, as we know. Experts scrambled to answer the urgent question, what has happened to Iran's stockpile of uranium and centrifuges? Satellite images taken by Planet Labs after the US strikes, analysed by the Associated Press, show damage to the facility. They suggest Iran packed the entrance tunnels to Fordo with dirt and had trucks at the facility ahead of the strikes. Several Iranian officials, including Atomic Energy Organization of Iran spokesman Behruz Kamalvandi, have claimed Iran removed nuclear material from the targeted sites. Before the Israeli military campaign began, Iran said it declared a third unknown site as a new enrichment facility. Questions remain as to where Iran may be storing its already enriched stocks, as these will almost certainly be moved to hardened and undisclosed locations out of the way for potential Israeli or US strikes, said Daria Dolskova, a senior research fellow at the Royal United Services Institute focused on non-proliferation issues. Global leaders responded with shock and calls for restraint. Egypt warned of grave repercussions for the region. Bahrain, home to the US Navy Middle East-based Fifth Fleet, called on Iran and the US to quickly resume talks. Interesting, because Bahrain there, one of the fellow Shia-dominated countries, so on a religious basis, Iran, Iraq and Bahrain on the same page there, calling for talks there. So there is at least some level of argument for negotiation.
I lived in Bahrain. I lived in Bahrain for about a month every year because I used to do commercials over there for them because of my dark eyes, and I used to have to wear the outfits. And it was very strange. Sent over there by my London model agent. They were very nice to me. It was just extremely restrictive and conservative, the way obviously females dress. But my question is this: I think it's probably likely that Iran did actually move whatever they were doing. Why wouldn't they? Because the rhetoric has been quite inflamed for some time. And if Trump sent that message 65, 67 days ago, because if he had struck any sites with enriched uranium, where's the fallout?
Well, that's part of what they talk about with the testing. That's why they test things underground so that the fallout is minimized. So it depends how deep.
They're not testing, they're bombing, so it would open it up. These bunker buster bombs go down, explode, and the explosion is also seen above. You're saying they can see it from satellites, so the explosion reach the surface. So where's the fallout if they did actually hit anything nuclear?
Yeah, well, the argument would be that there'd be some level of containment of said explosion there. And it depends, of course, on how deep. And there's been quotes of 500 meters deep, 700 meters deep. Some of them can go further deeper as well. And this is part of what we obviously had atomic testing here in Australia way back when, in the 50s. And of course, taken place, we saw what happened in Bikini Atoll back in the day when the very first ones were going off there. And so that is also interesting, isn't it? So, yeah, whether or not we will see said fallout. And some argue that you don't actually get fallout, which is another extreme concept as well. And people argue that you can go and visit Chernobyl when they said that you couldn't get in there for 10,000 years. And yet there's a thing called Chernobyl tourism where people walk through these areas that were affected. So
you know that Chernobyl is controlled by the World Economic Forum, and they've been running tests there and been on the ground ever since. The World Economic Forum are fascinated by Chernobyl. Look it up. They've even got special places on their site where they will explain what's going on to you. This has been part of their reserve guard action, I think, for a long time, which is very worrying for a World Economic Forum. But yeah, the fallout is something that I've questioned as well. It's either happening and they're not explaining that to the world because they really don't care about the people, despite saying we're not hitting civilian targets, or it hasn't happened because they haven't hit them, or enriched uranium isn't as much of a danger as we've been told. Because without fallout, if that does err towards it not being as dangerous as we've been told, then that negates all excuse for bombing them in the first place.
Well, that's a fair point, isn't it? But we're way before that. We get to that stage. But yeah, very, very interesting. I remember speaking to a Ukrainian lady during COVID who said that she'd got out of there and was living in that sort of Chernobyl area, and she said it was that poor that you were able to eat chicken once a month, and the chickens were so small that they were blue. And could you imagine having to live a life that things were that grim, just horrific? So I guess we must feel like we're a little bit lucky here in the West at these stages.
Oh, that's the future they want for us all, Jason. The powers that be, the real powers that be, they'd love us to live that way. I think for the longest time they've considered us in the middle classes to absolutely have it too good, to be able to save and get an investment property and go on holiday. It wasn't enough that they were vastly wealthier than us. They wanted the gap between them and us to get much greater, I think.
Indeed. Let's head towards rounding out the coverage on the Iranian bombing. I'm going to play a clip here from J.D. Vance, and then we'll get on to regime change, and then we'll be able to move on to the rest of the day's news.
What we're prepared for is if they attack us in a maximal direction, first of all, we have got maximum defensive posture. I think that we're going to be able to defend as many of our people as possible. And, of course, I'd encourage Americans to pray for our guys in the Middle East because, yes, they are under a significant amount of duress and a significant amount of threat right now. But then, of course, John, if the Iranians attack us, they're going to be met with overwhelming force. And I don't think the president could be clearer about this. If you look at what we did yesterday, John, we did not attack the nation of Iran. We did not attack any civilian targets. We didn't even attack military targets outside of the 3 nuclear weapons facilities that we thought were important to accomplish our goal of preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon. So how Iran responds, I think, is ultimately the ball is in their court. But if you look at what we did, it was very precise, very narrowly tailored to our objective. And if the Iranians decide to expand this, then that's ultimately their decision, and the President of the United States will respond in kind.
I find it interesting that other world leaders haven't really done their version of a press conference on what's happened in Iran. I think Xi Jinping, apparently it's reported that he said he doesn't agree with it because they've breached the UN Charter, which I think after what emerged from Wuhan is pretty rich. You've got some nerve, China, talking about UN charters. But right now, the USA and Israel sort of have the floor with regard to telling the rest of the world what's going on with this. I mean, what would happen? A lot of people say that this is a war between NATO and BRICS, that's what's really going on, because obviously Iran is a member of BRICS, right? So what would happen if all of those BRICS nations suddenly turned against the USA and Israel, Jason? I think we'd all be in a lot of trouble.
Well, it's such an interesting subject, and I'm glad that you brought it up because Rod Martin, who I like to quote on this show, he wrote a story on it at the weekend on multipolarity, and it's probably worth just doing a brief summary of what he said. He said, the elites love to chant multipolarity, that America's best days are over, that China is the future, that Russia can drive to Berlin. But then Trump walks into the room and suddenly Xi and Putin are silent. And he says Trump has peace talks underway with 130 countries, a ceasefire between India and Pakistan, $8 trillion in new investment, real border security, China, Russia and Iran on defense. Well, where are they? They're not exactly, China and Russia aren't coming out to help Iran. He's not retreating, though. He says he's dominating by making deals from strength. What are other powers doing? Putin 3 years in Ukraine without victory. Russia's economy smaller than Italy's or Texas. His Iran treaty worthless. His weapons exports are trash. When Israel struck Iran, Moscow could only beg for peace talks. Some polarity. The truth, Russia is a superpower in one respect and one respect only, and that is nuclear weapons. No one would take them seriously without those. Which is exactly why Trump won't let Iran have the bomb. And he says, what about China? Xi issued a statement asking America to please de-escalate. That's it. No aircraft carriers, no power projection, not even a threat. And interestingly enough, no advanced weapons shipments that Israel and the US would just destroy. Some influencers want you to believe that Russia and China would go to war for Iran. But if that's true, riddle me this. Why does Iran's Air Force still fly jets from the 1970s? Because Russia and China know there's a limit. And they use Iran, but they don't love Iran. Trump doesn't need 1,000 treaties to be taken seriously. He's got the B-2s ready at Diego Garcia, which he used, 120 military bases in 55 countries, 10 times the innovation of China, the global reserve currency, more GDP than all his rivals combined. He says that's power, that's real power. The multipolar world was a lie, a fantasy of Davos dinosaurs and foggy bottom fossils. There's only one pole, it's red, white and blue. It wears a red tie and it's back in the White House and the gap is getting wider, not closer. So that is the extreme other perspective there from Rod Martin. Very, very interesting times.
Because I just wonder if the other BRICS nations should be a bit worried, right, if this is like a litmus test. Because the US is funding aggression to Russia through Ukraine, and the United States is funding aggression to Iran, which is the member of BRICS, which is, Russia is a big part of that too. So I do think it's all strategic, and it's about a lot of things that we don't understand. I don't understand geopolitically. And there was something that was put up by, I think it was NATO. There was something that was put up, and they said, oh, we want your feedback on world events and what's going on. And click on here, and you can go to the website and ask your question. It's not just for establishment media. And I clicked on it because it was sent to me actually by our friend in Florida. And it said, sorry, you can't ask the question. And I was like, oh, okay. So questions from certain people, but not me. I just find it really interesting. I'd like to know more about that NATO BRICS connection. Again, I'm just worried about the people on the ground in Iran. I'm never pro-war. I'm never pro-conflict. But I'm also not pro-America being a bit pregnant. What are you doing with Ukraine and Russia? And how far are you going to take this in Iran? It's weird that they keep tweeting out they're not for regime change, but without regime change, I can't see that anything's going to be any different.
Yeah, well, that is interesting. Trump's comments there on regime change. Firstly, let's play JD Vance earlier on regime change to consolidate or support what you've just said.
Does the United States support Israel killing Iran's leader?
Well, look, that's up to the Israelis, but our view has been very clear that we don't want a regime change. We do not want to protract this or build this out any more than it's already been built out. We want to end their nuclear program, and then we want to talk to the Iranians about a long-term settlement here.
And there's Donald Trump saying it's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? Or MIGA, as he says, make Iran great again. And the point there is that this is the expectation from the US that the Iranian people will be the ones that demand regime change.
Okay, so how are they going to do that, Jason? Because the Iranian people have had their bank accounts hacked and emptied by someone. So this has been a heist as well. I don't know if it's their own regime or their attackers, America and Israel. But someone has emptied the bank accounts of the life savings of ordinary, everyday Iranians, which I find heartbreaking. When people will say, oh, this is all just part of war, but, that's pretty dark, what's gone on there. I mean, how will we get answers to that? Who will we know undertook that theft?
Well, that's interesting because there was another clip that I had of Ali Safavi. I haven't loaded it up, and he spoke about in that clip about money that the Ayatollahs were meant to give to the people of Iran, but were withholding it, never got there. So one would then argue that the lack of support for the Ayatollahs with that 19% take up in the vote there, where they quoted that it was higher, would suggest that there is certainly discontent within the Iranian people. So this would have to be one of those scenarios where the people would get out and march, as we've seen around the world. Whether or not that makes a difference, because we've seen here for the last 5 years, no matter how much protesting we do, nothing changes. How do you achieve regime change? This is the $64 trillion question, if you will. It is the great mystery, and we can only watch on and see what's going to happen there.
They can't protest. If they protest, the regime that is in now will kill them. So they can't protest. They're just running and hiding and getting out of the major cities. So it would need international help if that's what they're hoping to do.
And we shall watch on. Indeed, it's extraordinary. Let's change up the news now. And I just want to, this came from Algeria. This is another tragedy and a warning. The scenes in this you may find distressing.
مشاهدي المغمى سبورت الآن على المباشر سقوط عدد معتبر من أنصار مولودية الجزائر من المنعرج العلوي الجنوبي لملعب 5 جويلية، والإسعاف يقوم في هذه الأثناء بإجلاء المصابين. في هذه الأثناء أيضا حسرة كبيرة ودهشة.
So tracked there to a broken, rusted-out rail. 3 football fans have died and 70 injured in that horrific stadium disaster in Algeria. Sunday, supporters were celebrating MC Alger winning their top-flight league title for the second year running. They clinched top spot with a 0-0 draw against NC Magra on Saturday. Players and coaches rejoiced on the pitch as fans set off green flares around the stadium. However, during the euphoria, tragedy struck amid the celebrations in the packed stadium. Dozens of fans fell from the upper stands of the 64,000 capacity stadium. Local reports suggested a section of the security barrier collapsed in the upper tier. Many supporters had nothing to stop them from falling to the stands below. 70 people taken to hospital, 3 sadly passing away. Shocking story there.
This is one of the reasons I don't even like going to the MCG. I certainly don't like being on those terraces. You know, I just find the whole thing dizzying and dangerous, and you know, everyone's jumping around on those upper floors, and it's sort of vibrating, boom, boom, boom. Yeah, I mean, I've got vertigo, so that's probably part of it. But you could clearly see that railing was horribly rusted. They must have got their metal from China. And, you know, that should have been repaired. Shouldn't be making jokes about something so serious, but they should have got that repaired ahead of time. You know, there are so many of these stadium disasters that have happened, particularly in Europe. And you know, again, government's responsible, right? Government's responsible. They take all that money for people to get in, and then they don't use it to keep it safe.
It's hard to believe, isn't it, that you could have a stadium there that a railing would be, you know, you would simply cut that piece out and weld in a new piece. But to think that you would get away with that is just shocking. But it does show you, therefore, the differences around the world in first world, let's say, countries, Western world. That would be totally unacceptable. Goodness me, you can't even get on a bus, I think, these days without a seatbelt in Australia in certain circumstances, at least on a coach. And here we are, a stadium that's corroded. It's just shocking. Absolutely.
So advanced, Jason. 2 migrants with loaded weapons walked through the metal screening doors. They've got airport doors there at the MCG with 2 loaded guns, right? And we all get patted down when we go there, and they pull my stepson aside sometimes, and he giggles that, you know, he must look like trouble. And they pat you down and they personally scan you like at the airport. We're not so, excuse me, we're not so advanced. Still got my cough a little bit.
In 2004, when I took my family over to the United States, my 4-year-old daughter was patted down by a security guard at LAX, if you can believe that, to which I said, "Are you serious? We're from Australia. We don't even have guns." I said, "If you're patting down my daughter who's 4 years of age, we've already lost. You're kidding yourself." And no, they didn't want to know anything about it. I just thought that's just extraordinary, the things that you tolerate. Now, speaking of tolerating or intolerable, I find this is just vile. This is a story here that an Aussie, 62, Dominic OBrien, has died after allegedly being bashed by a released African immigration detainee. And it appears that this was a video that we played last week of a train attack. And we've now learnt that this fellow who was attacked afterwards. O'Brien was a photographer, multiple major outlets, and worked for an Aboriginal corporation in the Northern Territory. He has since passed away. An absolutely shocking story here, something that you would say, if you can predict it, then that means it is preventable, and this was not prevented, so that the Australian government is 100% culpable in the death of Dominic OBrien. So that was published there by the Noticer news agency. Just tragic, absolutely horrific.
Well, this is all part of what I said last week, Jason, when I asked the Australian government what they were going to do to protect women. Obviously, it's not just women. You know, if that guy has died of his injuries, my goodness, you know, what an indictment on their immigration, you know, behaviours. And you know, they just keep moving on, don't they? COVID, into war, into migration. They don't answer for any of the problems they cause. It doesn't affect them because they've got security guards and they're heavily protected. And then we on the ground have to suffer like that. I mean, that video was extremely distressing. I chose not to share it because it was so distressing. And I also don't like, you know, the use of all this violence to worry people going about their lives. But we're not protected here. You know, we've got migrants who don't seem to have come here with a trade. That's what it used to be. They don't seem to have come here having been through police checks from either the country they've come from or anywhere else. And they're running around with machetes, knives, axes, you know, whatever they can get their hands on. The Australian government are not addressing it. They'll spend more time addressing the conflict overseas in Iran than they will on protecting people here on the ground in Australia.
Here's another clip. This is one that made it all the way to mainstream news. This is another example of an assault on a bus. So there we go again.
This is not Australia. It's not Australia. It's not Australians, you know, and there's a saying that is hashtagged and repeated on the internet that says if you import the third world, you become the third world. And that's what's happening. We're not safe on public transport. Where kids are not safe in schools. So I've shared on my social media, my son's high school is next to a primary school, and the primary school kids and their mums are getting verbal attacks and threats of physical violence on the way to school. And what are we told? Well, primarily to get the police numbers up to where they need to be in Australia, we're looking at 5 years. But the reason we don't have the police numbers in Australia was because of the last crisis they heaped on us, which was COVID and vaccine mandates. And the ones that did comply, they're now sick or dead. The ones that chose not to take it, who lost their jobs, want to go back to work as police officers, but they're not being offered their jobs back. So this is engineered, it's created. I think there's that guy in Queensland that said he wants to remove all mandates because he wants every police officer, every soldier and every nurse and every doctor who lost their job to be able to go back to work. The people making the decisions in this country are deliberately delivering us Armageddon. It's got to be for a reason. I was thinking yesterday, and I tweeted on it, that there must be something extraordinary in the ground in Victoria that the globalists want, right? People talk about rivers of gold, right, because the gold rush was here. Because they're creating a state for Australians that is so unlivable, they are leaving in droves. Over 80,000 Australians left these shores forever a month ago. And this month we're up to 70,000 already. That's being reported by the mainstream news. I'm begging Australians not to leave. They're creating, a world where everyone wants to leave, rich and poor. If you've got a bit of land, they're coming after you with levies and heritage laws and all of those things, so that you can't afford to live there, even though you could afford at one point to purchase it. And for those on the lower economic spectrum, they're now homeless. They're living in cars or in parks. And there has to be a reason why they've done this to Australians. It's just abject cruelty.
It is. It's very, very sad. It continues. And you wonder if we're ever going to get to an end of it. But when politicians themselves now are above the law, where do you go next? I want to play you a clip here. This is Rod Roberts describing what happened with the inquiry that they had over the caravan affair from Dural, where nobody summoned showed up.
The witnesses are not in attendance and therefore failed to comply with the summons issued by the committee pursuant to Section 4, Subsection 2 of the Parliamentary Evidence Act of 1901. For any witness, not a member of Parliament, to decline to appear before a committee, having been properly summoned to do so, is an extremely serious matter. I am disappointed in the government's continued efforts to hinder and frustrate the work of this committee, and ultimately the role of the Legislative Council to scrutinise the actions of government. The committee will now consider further action in relation to these witnesses under sections 7 through to 9 of the Parliamentary Evidence Act 1901. And for these reasons, the hearing today will not proceed.
I can't believe this is where we are at now in Australia, that our politicians honestly believe that they are now above the law. And the point was that they weren't necessarily politicians that were summoned. These were staffers that have no right not to go there. So we'll see if Rod Roberts...
There's a reason for that. Nothing is as it seems. I've spoken before about the Constitution being this, and they've covered it in a fake paper. That's what's going on in Australia. I'm sure it's the same for other nations. Everything we're looking at is fake. Your police are not Commonwealth police. They are effectively guilty, which is a crime, of impersonating a police officer. A magistrate in a civil court told me they're sworn into the state now, not the Commonwealth. So I said in my court case, then this police officer has no jurisdiction over my case or me as an individual. And they said, thank you for coming, off you go, have a nice day, because I was correct. Now, it's the same for the politicians. They're also not sworn into the Commonwealth. So they actually have no jurisdiction over you. The ATO is no longer a Commonwealth revenue fund. It's a private corporation. So as per your free person directive to uphold the Constitution, you have no lawful requirement to pay taxes to a corporation that isn't a Commonwealth revenue fund. Vic Roads, there's a clip going around about Vic Roads with a security guard saying you can't come in, and the person says, of course I can, you're a government department, you're Vic Roads. And he said, no, we're a private corporation now, and I'm saying you can't come in. So that means you have no lawful right to, lawful obligation to deal with Vic Roads. So all of these things are a cover, a sham. Now, you are under no lawful obligation to contract with these corporate entities, but when you do, you've agreed to abide by their rules, like cult rules, because they're not laws.
Extraordinary scenarios, isn't it? And how do you then go about it? And the last thing that people want to do, of course, is to challenge it and then to be caught up and feel like that they're being chased for money that they thought they didn't have to pay to the tax office. So of course it becomes confusing, and this is where compliance for people, taking the path less travelled frightens people. Amazing.
Now, you have to question authority. You've said that on this show before, Jason.
I beg your pardon. Say that again.
You always have to question authority.
Yes.
Always. Yeah.
Always. And so what system we're going to use to be able to do that, I guess the logical way is to write to your local independent MP, of which there are few, but there are some. Maybe people can write to one of the four new One Nation senators and see where they're going to get, if they're going to get some support there. We're now going to head down to the health pathway. This is a video clip that popped up on social media. This is from Peter Hotez, who heavily involved with the whole COVID vaccine rollout. I don't know if I've seen a more confusing or deliberately deceitful comment from a man who I think has absolutely lost his marbles. I'll play it for you.
I do think the boosters were helpful because it wasn't always about death and hospitalization. There were a couple of other things going on to keep up with boosters. One was long COVID. If you were vaccinated and keeping up with your boosters, you had a greatly diminished likelihood of getting long COVID. And I think that was important. The other was, I don't think we adequately explained that this virus is we called it a respiratory virus. It was probably first and foremost a thromboembolic virus, right? It was, causing coronary artery blockage and heart attacks and strokes. And so actually one of the best ways to protect your heart health was actually getting vaccinated and keeping up with your boosters.
Does he realize what he's just said in that comment? Firstly, he doesn't read data and science, obviously. He's a fool. He just said, essentially, because we now know that this was engineered by a gain of function in a lab in China, he's just said that they engineered a virus, an airborne virus that can attack the heart. That's what he was saying. you know?
Yeah.
So you can't be right about one thing and wrong about another. So that was quite explosive, what he was saying. And, you know, for someone to sit there, it is like a cult, right? That you don't need, you either believe what the medical establishment profiting from all this has told you are facts, or you believe the outcome of what we were told by Greg Hunt was the largest human experiment in world history.
Yep.
Now, the outcome blows out of the water like one of these bunker-busting bombs. The real data and science blows out of the water the lies that were told to people. Now, if they were really trying to be on the right side of things, they would go into in detail the outcome to then talk about how we can make sure we never make these mistakes again. But that's not what they're doing. They're doubling down and going, no, thank God, you know, you don't get long COVID if you keep boosting. Are you kidding? That's when you do get long COVID.
We only said last week on the show, Dr. Zev Zelenko, when asked about his 3,000 patients that he treated prior to jab, because obviously he wasn't going down that pathway, how many got long COVID? 0, not one. And they said, well, how is that possible? He said, because I treated them with the early protocol, the Zev Zelenko protocol, which was to boost said immune system. Zinc being the primary factor. You use the, because zinc, what it does is, for the people that aren't aware, it stops viral replication. What you have to do, therefore, is to penetrate the cell wall and allow the zinc to get inside the cell wall. And that was achieved through either HCQ or quercetin or something else. And that was the point there.
You can make quercetin at home, right? So to make quercetin at home, get the most natural, and I know sometimes it's hard to find, grapefruits you can buy. So get 1 or 2 grapefruits, peel off the skin of the grapefruit, and boil it at a low heat, simmer it and boil it down, reduce it down, sieve off the skin. You don't need the old skin of the grapefruit. And then you're left with sort of a grapefruit tea. And believe me, it's one of the worst things you will ever taste. But if you take your zinc with that quercetin grapefruit tea, the quercetin allows the zinc to penetrate the cell and go inside, and it is extraordinary. I've been on it for the last week, and when I drink it, one of my eyes closes like a pirate, and I'm like, whoa! But, you know, if you hate it, then the germs hate it too, right?
And I can just imagine each individual cell getting a taste of said grapefruit quercetin, doing the same, squeezing up, and then the zinc gets in and everyone's healthy all of a sudden. Well, a little bit more on Peter Hotez. He's an American scientist, pediatrician, advocate in the fields of global health, vaccinology, and neglected tropical disease control, and educated at the Rockefeller University, a private institution responsible for collecting 26 Nobel Peace Prizes. Well, say no more, Hotez, but I am going to say some more. Peter Hotez, this is how brilliant Peter Hotez is, right? Check this out. A vaccine doctor who's an autism dad. Well, wouldn't you know, dumb luck there. And that's not to criticize his daughter, Rachel. Of course, she's the daughter of the great pediatrician, Peter Hotez. Hubris Hotez should be his name. He's even written a book. Vaccines did not cause Rachel's autism. And a question there says, anti-vaccine groups attack you regularly on social media because you've spoken out stridently against them and written op-eds and journal articles about the dangers of a resurgence of measles. How do you think they'll respond to the book? Oh, my goodness. There you go. Well, zealot. That man is what I...
That's what you call the unlucky sperm club.
Being
born to somebody whose head is so far in the sand with his ass in the air is very unfortunate, and I feel sorry for her.
Yeah, me too. Now, look, I'm going to give you one more. This is Nick Holscher appearing on Stu Peters with the name that we haven't mentioned for a few weeks now, which is kind of a good thing, but we bring him back.
Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in 2021, it was published in The Lancet. They found that by 2050, 75% of countries will not be able to sustain their population size. They won't have high enough fertility rates. And then at the same time, we have Gates Foundation funding mRNA construction factories and being instrumental in the rollout of them. So look at that contrast. They forecast population collapse. while at the same time they construct, roll out, and distribute ovarian-destroying injections to the population. And so this is only going to accelerate that. And so this is very worrisome. This has to be stopped immediately. And this should have the attention of people who are claim to be worried about fertility, like Elon Musk. He claims he's worried about it, but he's nowhere to be found.
The one thing I'll say, the one thing I'm going to say,
you know.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to say Nick Holscher needs to speak at 1.25 speed there. That would certainly make him just sound a bit closer to normal.
His job wasn't to be interesting or be a good presenter. He's obviously a very good, what is he, an analyst, whatever.
He's a what's the, not a vaccinologist, he is a epidemiologist. That's who Nick Holscher is. Now, this is a document that an eagle-eyed supporter of the show picked up. This is a document from the United Nations dating back to the 21st of March 2000. It's about 150 pages, give or take. Replacement migration. Is it a solution to declining and aging populations? Well, it's certainly been spurred on there by Bill Gates, who has his fingers in both pies, both the problem and the solution, all of which becomes the problem. An extraordinary scenario, absolutely, what we're seeing there, that you can be on both sides of the involvement. You can be so-called cure, which is not, and then go about a process there of replacement migration, so that the parts are already in play. We've seen the West absorbing massive immigration increases, presumably to disguise the fact that we have a reducing population, and then, of course, accelerated by COVID, which we've seen higher than normal.
The graveyards. Drive past the big graveyards. On the when you go over the Westgate Bridge, there's a huge one on the left going out of Melbourne, and you know, it's just you can tell the fresh ones because they've got the soil and lots of fresh flowers on them. And there's hundreds and hundreds, and it's constant. And, you know, the doctors know, the paramedics know, even the schools know. You know, a 9-year-old girl died suddenly, collapsed at the top of a stairway at my son's school a couple of years ago in the middle of all this. And she fell down a few stairs, 4 or 5 stairs, but she just died suddenly at school in front of all the other children. And this stuff goes on and they're not talking about it. And, you know, just the demographics with regard to the migration, the demographics you can see when you see the children getting off school buses, you can see the very reduced amount of Australian children that are in those groups getting off buses. And this is what I mean. We're being lied to about all of this. And so therefore, I don't expect to be told the truth about conflicts or anything else that's going on. It's a great cover, isn't it? Because I still, as I said, want to go back to find out why, who sanctioned it. I have a feeling Barack Obama was behind the whole bioweapon development in China, but he was also behind everything that was going on in Iran because, of course, he delivered lots of cash to this Iranian regime while he was president. So he's got his finger in a lot of pies. I think Obama probably is just a CIA asset, to be honest. He certainly wasn't the great first black president that we all hailed him to be. I remember sitting in a cafe, a deli in Santa Monica when he got elected, and I was so happy. And I said to the person next to me, "Oh, wow, great, you know, America's first black president." And I didn't realize this person was a staunch Republican. And she turned to me and she said, "You have no idea how much damage that man's going to do to this country." And of course, she was right. And I mean, his wife pushing this hashtag Me Too, hashtag Bring Back Our Girls, whilst at the same time bragging about being best friends with rapist Harvey Weinstein. So the pair of them were involved in some extremely dodgy stuff, Jason. And she's disappointed now because her podcast hasn't taken off. Boo-hoo.
The eldest daughter, Malia, actually went and interned for Harvey Weinstein shortly before his arrest originally. Right. Extraordinary. It's like, so I mean, yeah, you can't pretend that you don't know when you have Secret Service detail giving that information. Now, we've got a couple of stories left. I'll just quickly put up this, guys. Thanks, everyone, for your subscriptions to our Daily Australian Substack there. We really appreciate so many people coming aboard and supporting the show, realising that we work in this together, going from strength strength to strength. So for the next week until June 30th, so we've got 7 days to go, we have got the special there, 20% off the annual plan. It was usually $75 down to $60 for the entire year. That's $5 a month, or if you think about it, it's about 25 cents per episode of the Daily Australian. Thank you also for reposting, commenting, liking, loving, criticising, all of your active involvement. It makes a huge difference in supporting our show.
Gosh, I used to work for 10,000 a day, Jason. How times have changed. Thank you. And yes, today your subscriptions will be paying for new leads in Nicola's studio. So it's very important. This is stuff that we need to keep going. So thank you very much. What would you like to say before we go, Jason?
Well, I've just got just a couple of quickies. I wanted to give you today's a very unusual elephant in the room. I'll just play a clip for you now. So have a look at this. I just mind-blowing, really.
Assassin who disguised himself as a cop to shoot down Democrat politicians and their spouses. He killed 2 and seriously injured 2 others. Today, we're finding out he wrote a letter to the FBI claiming he was trained by the U.S. military, quote, off the books, and that Tim Walz asked him to kill Amy Klobuchar so he could take her Senate seat. Belter's facing state and federal murder charges. Sink or
Unbelievable. If that were even close to be true.
He's not getting out, is he?
No, he is not going anywhere. But I tell you what, that is a massive elephant in the room. The fact that Jesse Waters on Fox News played that in his a show is just an absolute extraordinary event. And it feels like we are getting closer to one of these things breaking, that something as incredible as that may well be, but many of us realizing, hang on a second, we've thought this for a very long time, but happening there in real time is just next level. Well,
he played that because it's politically expedient, because they don't like Tim Walz. If that guy really is the off-the-books trained intelligence asset he claims to be, then he would have been smart enough to have evidence that Tim Walz got him to do that. Because one of the things you're taught in the military is to always cover your ass. Same in business, right? So if he can provide that evidence, that's a whole different story.
Yeah, well, indeed. So we watch on, as we will with others. We've had breaking news that there has been a shooting in Wayne, Michigan. The shooter's been taken out. It was near, there were obviously lots of people around, whether it was a church or some sort of, I think that's what we're involved there. So we'll get some more details on that one. That's a shocking story. And also Kilmar Garcia, a magistrate has ruled that he needs to be released pending trial in the United States. He was the fellow that was shipped out to El Salvador and kept there. So that's another breaking story. Just unbelievable what we continue to watch here in this twisted up world that is the United States, in some form of civil war within itself. But we'll watch on and see. So keep going, guys. A lot happening around the world, and we will continue to report as we go.
The state of the world politically and geopolitically right now makes me a bit relieved, actually, that I didn't end up in politics, because it is so complicated. Even pundits talking about it, and there are so many layers to this, and I don't know if it's layered to confuse us and deceive us. We know that's something the intelligence services like to do, or if it's layered because it's a complicated thing to bring down. So if, of course, Iran, if their regime was CIA funded, Obama giving them lots of money, and now they're off leash because their people are no longer in power in America, then that would all make sense. But of course, this is all stuff that the current administration wouldn't be able to talk about. Everything is a crime scene cover up. We haven't got answers for things that happened 5 years ago, and I would like to see them. So I guess we just keep chugging through, Jason, and hope we get to the answers in the end. Thank you again for subscribing, supporting, and watching the show. I do apologise if I sound like I'm in a tin today. That will be fixed by tomorrow. That happened literally as I was coming to air. Thank you for watching the Daily Australian with myself, Nicola Charles, and Jason Olbourne. We will see you all over again tomorrow.